Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to another episode of Tacos al Pastor. My name is Jorge Rivera.
And this is Jaime Cortez, and we're so excited that you're listening or watching on video. Yeah,
I'm really excited about today's episode. It's a really good episode, I think. It's really has a lot to do with what's going on here at our church. That's kind of how that conversation started. But then it goes into like deeply into our culture, the meaning of a lot of things in our culture, which is what we want to talk about. So if you don't know Tacos al Pastor, we are talking about Mexican culture in specific because that's where we're from. And today's topic is Jesus versus Cristo.
Yeah, it is a big deal, right? At first, I thought it was just like no big deal. I mean, you can pick one over the other, but then, talking about it, we realized that it is not that simple.
It's not. It's really not that simple. And the more we talk about it, the more we realize like how complicated that is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this comes out of a conversation we had at our church where we have a motto, and the motto is love God, live like Jesus, serve others. And so out of that conversation, we were have a bilingual service. And out of that, we started thinking, how do we translate that into Spanish? Like, how do you translate that into Spanish? So at first, you said just translate it as...
My first thought was like, ama a Dios, vive como Jesús, sirve a otros.
Yeah.
Right? That was like the simplest translation in my mind.
And as soon as you said that, I was like, no way. I would never say it like that. I would not say it like that.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, but there's, I mean, it carries a lot of baggage, right? I mean, to pick one over the other. I mean, I thought it was just like, we say Jesus, we say Jesus, right? No big deal. But then we're going to explain a little bit why that's important. Well, before we get into why that's important, I think the importance of it is the reason we kind of started talking about it was because we came to this realization that in our culture, Jesus is a very common name. It is a very common name. It can be your neighbor. It can be your uncle.
Yeah. And so Jaime was like, hey, I read this book one time and they were talking about this. And it was like really interesting because it really opened up to like, oh yeah, Jesus is a really big name. Like my grandpa's name is Jesus. My uncle's name is Jesus. My cousin's name is Jesus. Like I have plenty of Jesus. I had both my grandpa and then my great uncle who was like a grandpa to me. His name was also Jesus.
Jesus, you're surrounded by Jesus.
I was surrounded by Jesus. You see,
by Jesuses.
Yeah, by Jesuses. And so that was like the crazy thing in my head, right? And I was like, oh, if you say vive como Jesus, it's like, oh man, my uncle wasn't always the.
But even if your
uncle wasn't always the greatest guy.
But even if you want to go a step farther, I mean, you can even say, right? Because if your name is Jesus, you don't call him Jesus, you call him Chuy,
Chucho,
right? Yeah,
Chuyin.
And so, I mean, if you're translating something like that, you can be like vive como Chuy.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's just
that's just a lot. Yeah. But and. I'm thinking about my own name, right? Because that's kind of what's important about this conversation is that it's about the name. And so that was really interesting in a lot of different ways because we were talking about Jesus and then translated that into Jesus. And it's like, no, that doesn't make sense. And so the name of Jesus was really important.
Yeah.
And so like, for instance, me with my name, right? Whenever I introduce myself to people, especially like people who are not Hispanics or Mexican or Latinos, then I always make sure I say, hey, my name is Jorge Rivera. Just like that. Just like it was meant to be said.
Yes.
Jorge Rivera. With the hard J, the R's and everything. Because that's my name. That is my name.
That is your name.
And that's what my mama wanted to call me. And so that's what she wanted to name me. And it's like, and so is that conversation whenever it's like, Anglo people read it or anybody else reads it, they read it and automatically they say George, and in my head, I'm like, well, technically, if you translate my name Jorge into English, it is George. You're right. but that's not my name.
That is not your name. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but it's that moment where it's like, George is my nickname, but not my real name. Jorge is my real name. Did you have any problems with that when you were?
Oh, I had a lot of problems, especially when I came to the United States, because people in high school, they didn't ask me for my name. They were just reading, especially teachers, right?
Yeah.
They were reading it out of the attendance list, and they would just call my name Jamie. And at first, I was like, okay, who is that person, right?
Yeah.
And then they would say Cortez, and I'm like, well, that's my last name. So that means that I'm Jamie and not Jaime. And I hated that because I didn't know this at that moment, but I didn't know that Jamie, I mean, it can be a female or a male name, right?
But it was mostly related to female names.
Females, yeah. And so just think about it. You're Hispanic in an Anglo school with a name that kind of goes towards females. I mean, I was just, people were they were making fun of me in every way.
They hurt you right into machismo, right?
Right. And so I wanted to change my name so bad,
yeah,
but I couldn't, right?
Yeah.
And so I just stick with Jamie throughout my 4 years in high school.
Oh goodness. No, I made sure that I when people, if they called me George on attendance or whatever, I was like, no, ma'am, it's Jorge.
Yeah.
Like, I just want you to know it's Jorge. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And so I had to make sure that that's what they heard and knew and understood.
Well, I tried, but it was just, when you read my name, when you read it, it's just
yeah.
Yours, at least, they can play with it because
it's not spelled the same in English and Spanish.
Yes, yeah. But mine is kind of this. It's just one letter that makes a difference. It's the I.
The I.
Yeah, it all depends where you put it, right?
Oh, good.
And so it was horrible, but and then when I moved to Texas, it was just completely different because everybody were like Jaime.
Yeah, it makes a difference, right?
Because
we're used to that name in Texas. It's like, oh, that's a pretty common name. Jaime makes sense.
Yeah.
Especially for a guy that looks like you to call Jaime instead of Jamie.
You're right. And so it was a challenge, but I'm glad I'm
you figured it out.
It's I'm not over it yet, but still, I'm just like whatever,
And you're telling me you were thinking about changing your name.
Oh, I probably will. I'm in the process of getting my citizenship.
Yeah.
And they ask you a question if you want to make some changes to your name, and I thought about it for a long time. And I even talked to my wife about it, and we decided, no, I'm just gonna leave it like that.
What were you gonna change it to?
That was the problem, that I didn't have a name that I liked. So we just decided just leave it like that right now. Yeah. So.
Dude, that's the thing about the name, right?
Yeah.
That it's like, oh no, this is what my name is. It's Jorge, not George. And so even when you're translating that, the name kind of sticks and it's important. It's actually really important because my name Jorge is not just Jorge because my parents decided that they were going to call me Jorge. It had a meaning to it. Like, it made sense, right? So I was born in 1990, which is like the height for football. It's soccer if you're American.
Football
in Mexico. And most importantly of all, Mexico was possibly one of the most iconic goalkeepers in the history of Mexican soccer. Jorge Campos.
Oh yeah.
The dude's iconic. You'd know him because of the clothing that he would wear and his uniforms, and they were always really colorful and always had something important, interesting in them. And it was never just like a regular uniform. It was always had to stand out. And so he was a massive icon in Mexican history in that moment. So my dad was like, my son has to have a name that is Jorge. It has to be Jorge. Like, Jorge Campos was his idol, and he was like, and my son's gonna be Jorge. And so that, so whenever people ask me like what my name is, and I tell them Jorge, in Mexico they either think like some other Jorge that's famous, or they'll say Jorge Campos.
Yeah.
And then so it's always like they always connect it automatically without me telling them to one of the Jorges that is famous from Mexican history.
And that's funny that you mentioned that because so before, when I was probably in my 20s, there was a single Jaime that was famous. No one, right? it wasn't until Jaime Camil, right? Jaime Camilucci. And this guy, he kind of started putting he kind of started putting the name on, you know, on a pedestal, like, oh, Jaime, I mean, he's the real deal, right? And so now people were like, when people asking for my name, like, I'm Jaime, and they're like, oh, like Jaime Camil, and I was like, oh yeah, you got it right. And so you're right about that.
For whatever reason in our culture, like, they automatically, you know, put it right next to somebody's name. Is like, it's almost like a point of pride in our culture. You know, it's like, oh, it's not just Jorge. It's Jorge, like Jorge Campos, Jorge. You know, like, it's not just Jaime. It's Jaime Camil, Jaime.
Yeah.
Like, you share that identity with somebody.
And that changes everything in the way you see names, right? Because it's just not just a simple Jaime, but this is like Jaime Camil, like, you know. And so that kind of translate into our conversation, right? Because it brings this sense of identity to a person too, right? Like that's my name, that's why it is, and it brings not just identity, but it's, like I said, it's pride, it's identity, it's just brings you closer. It makes you feel a part of whatever was happening at that time and moment, or whatever that person was, whoever that person was. It connects you in a deeper level than what it is. I think in other cultures, you might name somebody after like you know, like a dad. So there's like juniors, like my brother's name is Victor because my dad's name is Victor, you know. And so it's like, and then my younger brother, his name's Romario because when he was born, guess what? Romario is a Brazilian soccer player. So you can see like how soccer made a big, you know, identity thing in our lives. It's like, that was important. That's what we did. And that was a big thing. And so it's like, that dude was an amazing soccer player. So therefore my dad was like, Romario, because I like, we know no other Romarios other than Romario from the Brazilian soccer team. And so you know, it's like, Romario's not really even like a Mexican name, it's Brazilian. He was Brazilian.
and so it's in that point where it's like, oh no, we still identify with that name because like you either love that person or you care for that person in such a different way. And so when you get to the name of Jesus, it kind of does something similar, doesn't it?
And especially when you live in a Hispanic culture, right, that everybody wants to name their kids Jesus. It's either Jesus, Jose, or Maria. Right? I don't know why, but I think we know why now. But it's just, it's that critical, right, that you have to have a Jesus in the family
somewhere. And it's almost this idea of like I said, it's connecting and nearness to that person. And so in the culture, like, the name is so dominant because people wanted to make sure that they had a connection to Jesus, the Son of God, in their families. And so it's because, and part of it has to do with the depth and ingraining of Catholic culture and theology with, religion with the Mexican people. Like, Catholicism is massive, and so therefore, like, that end of religion is just massive in Mexico, and it's dominant in so many ways. I mean, to the point where people do crazy stuff whenever there's some kind of thing going on. Like, they'd go far and beyond for the religion, and so having a part of that identity of religion in the family was very important. You know, like that's super important. You have to have that. And that comes out of the Catholic religion of, being near to God and having God amongst you. And so we're reading this book and kind of you start thinking about it. And the book is called Jesus is My Uncle by Luis Pedraja. And it's a great book that talks about the duality of cultures and the status of immigrant, Latinos in America, how we have a dual identity because we're both Mexican and American, in the duality and the dual identity that Jesus had is he was divine and he was also human. And so, but he starts out this book by talking about, whenever there was Protestants were coming to Mexican and Latino countries, like, they would say, hey, do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Because they would translate Jesus instead of Jesus. They translate Jesus into Jesus. And they say, hey, do you know Jesus? And then the people would answer, yeah, I know Jesus. Jesus is my uncle. He lives right down the road. And
it's my neighbor. He's my uncle.
Yeah, he lives right there. I know Jesus. I know him really well. And so what happened was, like, the people heard Jesus, and they did not think of God's son as Jesus, but Jesus, their family member, their neighbor, their uncle, whatever it was. And so it created this crazy dynamic where the people were did not connect the name of Jesus with God the Son anymore.
With the divine.
Yeah. And so it was almost like they made this hard line where Jesus is Jesus, and then you have Cristo. Cristo is the Son of God. That's who you know to be the Son of God.
Yeah.
But Jesus.
Yeah, and so that's why when you ask me about the translation of vive como, live like Jesus, I was immediately like vive como Jesús.
Yeah.
Because in my mind I have Jesus, right? The Jesus that is with us, that it's in the same sufferings with us. And so for me, there was no problem translating Jesus and Jesus, but for you, it was different.
Yeah, because what happened was that I became a Protestant at some point. That's how you did it. But I became a Protestant at some point, and I had this ingrained in my head that Jesus is Jesus, and that could be us, that can be anybody. But then Cristo is Cristo Jesus. And even when we would say Jesus, it was like Jesucristo or Cristo Jesus. We always had Cristo
in
it. The title. We had the title. Yeah. So not just the name, but with the title. So like it would be Jaime, but if you were a doctor, we would say Doctor Jaime. It's like we'd make sure that we add the title on there. And so whenever I was trying to translate, I was like, but you gotta have the title in there somehow, like because you gotta make sure you know which Jesus we're talking about. And part of like the thing, right? Because and I think in English, like we don't make that we don't make the distinction of separating Jesus from Christ, mainly because I don't know many, if any, Americans or Anglos or anybody named Jesus. It's mostly just a name for Mexicans and the Son of God.
Yeah. In fact, I haven't heard like anyone named Jesus in the.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to go and find out or make something.
Hey, if you are not a Latino and your name is Jesus, please let us know. We want to meet you. That's awesome.
But it has to be Jesus, not Jesse or it has to be Jesus. Yeah. In fact, you have a story that you want to share with us, right? So
along with that, because we have that distinction, right? So my first church where I was at working was in Rosenberg, Texas. And one of the students that was in the student ministry, his name was Jesus. And so Jesus was this great kid. Oh man, I still to this day love Jesus. He is a great kid. He is awesome. He's doing great things. And so it was always Jesus. And like I said, with my name is Jorge, but Mexicans could call me George because they know that's my nickname. They know that's not my name. They know that's my nickname, so they can call me George. Yeah. But if it's Americans,
it's kind of weird, right? It's kind of weird because, I mean, how do you explain that, right? To some people.
Because I don't want, so if you don't speak Spanish and you call me George thinking my name is George, I just want to make sure that's not my name. But if you're, Hispanic, Latino, Mexican, and my name is Jorge, but you call me George as a nickname, then I'm cool with it. Like my niece and nephew, they call me Uncle George, not Jorge.
Yeah.
But they know my name is Jorge.
Yeah.
If somebody says, what's his name? They say Jorge. And then anytime they refer to me, they're like, Uncle George,
But anyways, it's like my brother-in-law, right? Yeah. His name is Simon, and we just call him Simon.
Yeah. But his name is Simon.
Yeah.
And he knows that his name is Simon.
But we just like always Simon.
Yeah. It's the nickname, right? So whenever I got there, like they started doing that because it was a Hispanic church, it's a Latino church, and they were like George, and so that was as a nickname, and so. That was the first time that I encountered this this reality, because Jesus was in the room and like he had we had another student named David and we call him David, and so we kind of did that in our own heads as a nickname kind of thing. And then for whatever reason in my head, his mom was in the room and I don't know what was going on, what was going through my head. I didn't think about it, and I say, "Hey Jesus." And his mom got onto me right away. She was like, "No, it's Jesus. No, it's not Jesus. Don't call him Jesus."
Yeah.
Because Jesus is Jesus and this is Jesus.
Yeah. And it's kind of weird, but right, because even 2 days ago we had a meeting.
Yeah.
And one of the pastors, his name is Jesus. And so I was just kidding here at the office, and I said, "Look, Jesus is coming to the meeting." And then they were kind of looking at the paper and they're like, "Are you just making fun of me?" And I'm like, "This is what it says here. Jesus is coming to the meeting." And it's just funny because they would never call somebody that's his name is Jesus. They would never call him Jesus.
Yeah, they would not. Because Jesus is reserved name with title to Jesus, the Son of God.
But they can call me Jamie, not Jaime.
Exactly. And so it's this crazy moment, right? Where it's like, oh, in English, Jesus is tied totally and completely to Jesus Christ, whether we say Christ or not.
Yeah.
But in Spanish, we know it's Cristo.
It's Cristo.
And so it's this crazy moment, right? Where it's like, oh gosh, yeah, Jesus is different from Jesus. And so we can't really translate live like Jesus, vive como Jesús. Mm-hmm. And so what we ended up doing is after we talked for maybe an hour, or at least it felt like an hour, that we talked about how are we going to translate this one word, which sounds outrageous, right? But we ended up like agreeing, because we all agreed, oh yeah, it should say vive como Cristo, so that way we know which Jesus we're talking about.
But it was
which Jesus we're talking about, because there's only one Jesus apparently.
There is only one Jesus,
but there's plenty of Jesus. Yeah. And so
the other thing is, like, I think that names define who we are, right? As a culture and as a person, because even now that you're Protestant, or that we are Protestants, in the Protestant church, you don't name your kids Jesus.
No, you don't. Yeah.
So how do you name him?
No, well, you either go to Josue, or
you have a lot of Josues now.
You have a lot of Josues, Caleb's, it's like David, yeah. And so you find every other name in the Bible, but not Jesus.
Not Jesus, right?
Not Jesus, yeah.
Which is a distinction that if you grew up being Catholic and then now you're Protestant, you kind of notice that.
You notice the difference in there. Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's a big part of identity, that Jesus' identity in English is completely tied to the Jesus. Mm-hmm. We don't have to think about, wait, which Jesus are you talking about? But in Spanish, it's that identity that is like, okay, we have to know which Jesus we're talking about. And so we're going to make sure we say Jesus Cristo, mm-hmm. or Cristo Jesus, or Cristo. Because then we know, and we have no room for thinking or wondering which Jesus it is. No, we know which Jesus we're talking about. We're talking about the Christ Jesus. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what can we take away of all these naming and names and everything? What can we take away and be like, okay, I got this?
Yeah. So I think it's important, because, like I said, names are important, and because they bring identity. And so it's in that moment where you don't come to people and say, do you know Jesus? Because they say, oh yeah, I know him. He's my uncle. He's this, he's that. No, you have to know and understand, oh, it's Cristo. And so it's that moment where, like, the identity becomes so important in people's lives that we have to be able to relate to their identity. Mm-hmm. And so what that looks like in practical terms, right? So in our church, one of the ways that we kind of started doing this is trying to find the identity of the cultures that we're serving, and the identity of the cultures that we're trying to reach, and figuring out, okay, how can we translate what's been known in the culture and bring Cristo into it, mm-hmm. right? So how can we find, where can we find Jesus and bring Cristo into it, because Jesus is just the culture, the identity of the culture that exists out there, that's very common, that everybody does and everybody thinks and everybody tries. But a lot of times, a lot of the cultural aspects of our culture in Mexican culture, mm-hmm. Have become very pagan. So it's like we do a lot of traditions that are traditionally Christian, but they're just traditions now. That's like, it's just what Mexicans do.
Yeah.
And so I think the figuring out where some of those things are and figuring out how we can bring Christ into them, because, like I said, Mexican culture is filled with it because due to the Catholic influence that was there. And so figuring out how we can find Christ and how we can show Christ within those moments. So in our church, going back to what I was saying, in our church, one of the things that we found and that we started acknowledging was like Dia de Reyes.
Mm-hmm.
Dia de Reyes, growing up, Dia de Reyes
was the big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal. I mean, and actually, whenever I moved to the United States, we were here in America, it's like, I don't ever remember my friends thinking about, the wise man or the three kings day, the king's day, it was like, it was completely unknown to them. They had no idea what was going on.
So when you became Protestant, were you still celebrating King's Day or the Dia de Reyes?
No.
Why not?
I have no idea why not.
I mean,
because I mean, I know why. Because it for whatever reason, like I said, a lot of the traditions that are in Mexican culture can be tied back to Catholic religion one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you become a Protestant, in a lot of ways, you try to deny everything that's Catholic. And so, you know, and which is this crazy moment where it's like, oh, but that's also just Mexican.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so while they threw out the baby with the bathwater, they said, oh no, you know, Dia de Reyes, that's a Catholic thing. And it doesn't matter if Mexicans do it, we're just not going to do it. And so Protestants would not do that. You know, normally most Protestants would not celebrate those things.
Yeah, no.
But it's in that moment where you're like, oh no, yeah, it's engraved in the culture. It's there in the culture, ingrained in the culture. Like they do it, they celebrate it, and it's biblical.
And it's in the Bible.
It's in the Bible. Like this is an event that happened in the Bible that they want to celebrate and think about and celebrate. You know, and so it's in that moment where it's like, oh wait, Dia de Reyes, that's Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just the thing that everybody does, that everybody thinks about. But they, you know, it's like, oh, how can we bring Cristo into this? How can we help people realize and understand that it's not just the name Jesus, and it's not just a day, you know, and it's not just some random wise men, but that it's the story of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so how can we do that? How can we translate that into, you know, the terms that we know and have?
Yeah.
And how can we learn to differentiate between just what we're denying in Catholic religion and what's biblical and what we can grasp and hold on to, you know? And so, like I was saying, now we do a Dia de Reyes celebration, and man, it's a hit.
It is.
I mean, you tell people you're gonna put a little baby in a rosca, and they're all over it.
And they come.
And they come. Yeah.
Chocolate rosca.
Oh my gosh, I know it. Yeah. And so it's like, oh man, that's not Catholic. That's Mexican in a lot of ways.
It is, yeah.
And so to just completely do away with it because Mexican culture is so tied to Catholicism as a Protestant, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh man, why would we do away with that when that could be so helpful in helping people understand the story of Jesus? Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ, Jesucristo.
Jesucristo.
You know? And so I think that's part of the application, right, in our lives is like, okay, this has a deeply cultural identity. Mm-hmm. In a Mexican culture.
Yeah. Something that came to my mind, it was a conversation I had several months ago with other friends that I have, and it was about names, right? Yeah. Because even now in the church, Baptist churches, sometimes you don't memorize or you don't identify people's names because we have the tendency to just call them hermanos.
Yeah.
Right? And you just kind of lose the... Okay, I have to memorize his name because the name is important.
Hold on, wait, let's stop recording real quick. Sorry, if you're watching this, we just lost the recording. Oh, there we go.
And so people now that have the tendency of not remembering names.
Yeah.
Right? And we know that names are important. When you go to a church and you know that somebody knows you by name, I mean, it just feels good other than somebody calling you just hermano.
Just hermano, yeah.
Right? But if they call you like hermano Jorge or hermano Rivera, I mean, that feels different. It feels like a place where you belong, right? That there's family that know your name, your last name, that know your family, and it has a different meaning for you.
Yeah,
than just calling you hermano, and they're like, what's his name? I don't know. I always call him hermano. Right?
Yeah. And so, I think that's important too, because it's like, oh yeah, the name has a meaning, has importance, and so, and even that, like that's part of the same issue, right? That's like, it's deeply theological, because we are brothers in Christ.
We are, yeah.
But we need to figure out how we can find Christ in it. You know, it's like, we're not just gonna call everybody hermano just because I just want to say call them hermanos,
and then you would never know their names.
Yeah, and so if you're ever called hermano, you know, it's like that's what they're meaning. They're not just saying you're my brother, but they're saying, oh, you're my brother in Christ. They're acknowledging that.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that's like I said, that's the thing with this topic where we had such a deep conversation, because it's like, you have Jesus, which is the popular cultural understanding of Jesus. It's like, oh, that's my uncle, that's my friend, that's my neighbor, that's this, that's that. But then you also have to find the deeply theological meaning and understanding of it, and a lot of the culture, and figuring out how you can take advantage of it and be able to use it and find ways that it can be effective in your ministry. So don't do away completely with Mexican culture just because it is deeply tied to Catholic religion and understanding and theology. And so I think I think we as Protestants, we tend to do that a lot. It's like, oh, Catholicism is not the worst thing in the world.
No, it's
like
not.
It teaches amazing things, and it engraves in the culture in such a deep way that it's like, oh, how can we help like fully grasp this understanding? And so I think that's important. That's really important. Yeah.
So I have to ask you this.
Go ahead.
So if you have an Anglo friend, or a white or black, so would you? And if you have another friend whose name is Jesus, would you tell him his name is Jesus, or would you tell him his name is Jesus just to mess with him?
Well, because I was scolded to saying his name's Jesus, not Jesus. I probably would say Jesus. Because in my head, I'm like, I like, now that I've heard that I said Jesus, I knew not to say Jesus, but everybody was trying to put everybody's name in English that I say Jesus. And so I was like, and so now I know it's like, oh no, I have to make sure that I make the difference and make the understanding. Because like you were saying, whenever we said, oh, Jesus is coming to the meeting, even though we knew it was Jesus and we were just messing with them, they were like, what?
Yeah.
Are you messing with me? What's going on? What are you talking about?
Yes.
Because there is the understanding, right? That Jesus is, there's only one Jesus.
Yeah.
There's plenty of Jesus.
But there's plenty of Jesus.
Yeah.
But and I think that also we have to make the difference, right? Like you were saying, like, because Jesus, he was human, he was divine, and for us, sometimes the human is Jesus, right? The person that lives among us, the person that eat with us. That it is that kind of Jesus.
Yeah.
But then you go to church and it becomes Cristo, right? The person that came and saved us.
Yes.
The person who suffered for us on the cross.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I like the culture, that how it give us this flexibility to talk about the names of Jesus or the name of Christ or God. I don't know. It's even confusing now.
Yeah.
but I like that flexibility that we have, right? That we can talk about it.
Well, I think it's I think in Spanish you fully grasp the identity of Jesus, both as human and divine, in a different way than you do in English. Because in English, I tend to say Jesus, and that's both in one. And so it's so easy to kind of forget that Jesus was both human and divine, because you put it into one. But in Spanish, you make sure you make that distinct separation of Jesus, who can be my uncle, who is with us, who is amongst us, God with us, right? Emmanuel. And then Cristo, like, whenever we're talking about the Son of God specific, it's Cristo. And so I think in Spanish you make that distinction. I think that's beautiful. And that's wonderful. And I think that's something that we can learn and grasp and understand from language and culture in general. So I think that's awesome.
It is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
Dude, I've been staring at these tacos, and that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, man.
But so it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge for us, even because, again, we have friends, names are Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, but we also have to navigate here, and it's just, I mean, we're kind of finding that balance, right, in this moment where we are right now. But I like it. I mean, it's a great challenge.
It makes you really think about things in a different way, and that's what I like. And so I hope you guys find some value in this. I mean, just let us know. Like I said, if your name really is Jesus, actually Jesus, let us know. Not Jesus, like, I mean,
Not Jesus with the acento en la U. No, not that.
No, Jesus. Then let us know. I think that'd be interesting to find somebody. I've yet to meet somebody named Jesus that's not Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And so, yeah, man. So I think that's, that's part of the conversation of culture, is that man, there's so much we can learn from one another.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that we can learn from one another. In just even the simplest things, such as a name. You know,
makes a big difference.
We learned a lot just trying to translate this phrase.
Yeah.
We learned a lot in our church. We learned a lot as people, and we learn not just about language, but we learn about theology.
Yes.
And so I think that's the importance of having these conversations that we're having here at Tacos al Pastor, because it's like, oh man, if we could just grasp that and hear that and understand that, like, it could make a difference on the way we do church, that our cultural identity is important, not just for the sake of being Mexican or whatever the culture is, but it's important theologically as well. And like, we can learn so much by just learning how to translate something and hearing and trying to figure out how you would translate it, you know? So like, for another application you can have is like, oh man, it's for me, whenever I get to preach in a bilingual service, like, I translate my sermon, and as I'm translating, I change my sermon completely, because I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't say that in Spanish, so I'm not going to say it in English, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of applications you can find with just figuring out how to translate, how you're going to translate this name, you know?
Yeah,
how you're going to translate that. And so I really encourage you guys to just think a little bit deeper about how other people might hear something, because it makes a difference. You know, and it's funny, like, we started out talking about how we translated Jesus and Cristo, Jesus, live like Jesus, into vive como Cristo, and nobody batted in the bilingual service when we do it in Spanish. Nobody bats an eye. They all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that in the bilingual service, they say it both in English and Spanish. So they said, love God, live like Jesus, serve others. Ama Dios, vive como Cristo, sirve a otros. And they don't even think that they just said Jesus and then Cristo in Spanish.
Yeah.
They didn't think about it. It just happened. And so that part is really interesting to me as well.
It is.
Yeah. Well, hey, y'all, I am looking at these tacos and I'm really excited. And so I hope you guys enjoy this episode. Leave a like, comment down below. Let us know what you think about the podcast. Like I said, if you have a topic you think we might be able to talk about, if you want, there's something that interests you that you want to learn from our culture that we know, we'd love to talk about it. If you have a taco you think we need to try out, I mean, we love tacos al pastor. Those are some of my favorite ones. Yeah. But if you have a taco we're going to try out or something interesting with that, let us know. We're really excited about that. Y'all, thank you for listening to Tacos al Pastor.
Adios.
Now I'm going to eat my tacos so you can hear me eat tacos. I'll get my hot sauce too.